We're going to be talking about one of the finalists called Torishéju Dumi. And I find her work really interesting. I've known about her work for a while, actually. Not too long, but a while. And I think her work is just interesting and really good to talk about. So for people that don't know who Torishéju Dumi is, she's a fashion designer that went to CSM. She graduated with her MA from Central St. Martin's. She's also an alumni of the Sarabande Foundation, as you can see on the screen. She has a very extensive body of work in fashion, and she's worked for many different brands. She's worked under Phoebe Philo at Céline. She's also worked at Giles Deacon, Sibling London, and she's worked for my favorite brand of all time, as you guys know, Ann Demeulemeester. So she's definitely a designer that I'm a huge fan of. If I was to describe her work, I think her work is very intellectual. She does look at a lot of historical references in her work. She references different cultures, and a lot of her work kind of finds that perfect medium between, design cues and design inspirations from different cultures like Nigeria, West Africa, and many other regions, but also mixes in Western design elements into her work. So that's something that, I've always appreciated about her work. So specifically, I wanted to talk about two of her collections and then talk about another capsule collection she did that I thought was, really cool. But to show you something really cool, the first time I actually heard of her was when she was featured, I think it was in British Vogue, where she was kind of part of this cover, which you can also see Tolu Coker and Priya Alawalia, and they were talking about them being sustainability trailblazers. Tolu Coker and Priya Alawalia are two designers that I've talked about on this channel. So if you aren't aware about their work, just type their names and it will come up. My videos will come up, but I've broken down both of their work quite extensively. So those are designers that you can learn about in your own time. But that was kind of when I first learned about her work. So first off, we're going to look at this collection, which is Spring Summer 2025 collection, which is called La Nef de Fuse, which basically translates perfectly to the Ship of Fools. This is very much inspired by Hieronymus Bosch's The Ship of Fools painting. The painting, actually, let me show you the painting for people that aren't too familiar, because there's actually funny parallels that you can draw between this collection and the painting itself. So this is the painting here. So Hieronymus Bosch's Ship of Fools painting essentially encapsulates, the painting is supposed to encapsulate the chaos of human nature. So when you look at the painting closely, you can see people indulging in, the just decadence and gluttony and just eating loads of food, and there's so much chaos going around the middle of the painting. When you look at the nun is singing and is so engrossed in what she's doing that she can't see the chaos that's happening around her. There's a part of the painting that you can't really see from this, but someone was I think cutting, from the top of the painting, cutting off a piece of meat from the top there. So the whole painting, and there's so many different parts of the painting that I could talk about forever, but that's not really the point of this video, kind of just talks about the chaos, and it's really just supposed to be a commentary on our propensity towards self-destruction as human beings. And that was kind of one of the main inspirations for her collection. Now, when you look at the collection, obviously there is a lot of chaos. Chaos, I think, is a general theme across a lot of her work. When you look at her work, there tends to be, things that we associate as ordinary, down to accessories like earrings, but just changed enough to where it makes you think. It draws your eyes towards those accessories, but it's not so ridiculous that it starts to look, like odd or way too costumey or just strange. So that's an aspect of her work that I've always liked, but that's also a theme that I've seen across multiple collections, not just one. Son is saying shout out to Hieronymus Bosch. He was a real geek. Yeah, for sure. So in this collection, in lieu of the painting that was referenced, she really wanted it to reflect the chaos of our times. Of course, so much chaos is going on in our times right now, which is why there's a lot of deconstruction in the work in this collection. Like I said, there are different elements that have been shifted to create a sense of chaos. There were these really nice pearl earrings that were shifted for this to have this sort of chaotic vibe. You can see the tie tied backwards on the neck instead of the front. So those are a lot of the elements that were added to the collection to add this sense of chaos throughout. A lot of people were saying most people flock to what is familiar, not what is intriguing. I see what you guys mean in terms of the reference to the painting, because that's something that I always critique, that a lot of fashion designers tend to reference the same paintings constantly and stuff like that. So that's definitely something that is common in fashion, something I do have an issue with, and I have voiced my opinion on that. Also, you can see a lot of offcuts of the scraps of her clothing have been used to sculpt a lot of the garments. That's where there's sort of this sort of deconstructed element coming in. It's sort of what she says in her own words, a decay of decadence. It's kind of like this sort of thing that's supposed to, look like something that has failed. I know one of her direct references in this collection was those pieces were supposed to reference a failed life jacket, because when a life jacket fails, it doesn't inflate completely. So the offcuts are being used to kind of inflate certain aspects of the dress while other parts remain flat. That's an interesting reference that I thought. When I looked at this collection, what it did remind me of is elements from Garçon, because I've seen this kind of technique of using different materials and stuffing it to create certain shapes in a garment. But yeah, I definitely thought that was a cool, and the way she did it was very interesting. Culture said the black dress is interesting. You're talking about the earlier one with the offcuts used to sculpt the garment. I mean, I like those in general because I think they look weird but cool, and they're actually wearable. One of the issues, and I know this is something that some people have said in the chat when it comes to Comme des Garçons, is that it's not wearable because of how they sculpt the garments in the Comme des Garçons shows. I think this is like kind of taking a similar idea, but making it actually more wearable and something that you could actually potentially wear yourself. Let's see what Boaz is saying. The issue is that the intellectualism takes over the design. Your job as a fashion designer is to be a fashion designer. I don't think so. I don't necessarily agree with that, because I think that fashion exists on a spectrum. So if this side of the spectrum is clothing that is totally supposed to be wearable and commercial, that's on one side of the spectrum. And then on the other side of the spectrum is just art. And every brand can decide where they sit on that spectrum. So let's say a more pragmatic, minimal brand like Giles Deacon or maybe Phoebe Philo, that's more commercial but beautifully made and really nice, is more on this side of the spectrum that's close to, practical commercial clothing that's made for people to wear. And then Comme des Garçons mainline will be all the way on this side of, the art spectrum, where most of it is not really intended for people to wear, and a lot of it looks ridiculous and wouldn't make sense to wear. But there is an artistic conversation that Rikao Kubo is trying to have through those garments. The whole point is not necessarily for all the clothing to totally be wearable in that sense. So I just think it depends on where a designer actually wants to sit on that spectrum, rather than, designers having to be commercial or having to design through the lens of like a certain thing. So yeah, I just think it depends. It depends on what the designer is going for. I love your comments on commercial success and avant-garde designers, by the way. It feels very relevant to this conversation. Yeah, I think designers just have to choose, where they want to sit, to be honest. I think that's up to them. That's honestly up to them. So yeah, this was one of the collections that was recent that a lot of people were talking about. Another collection that I want to talk about, so one collection which you can see via the Met here, it's called Mami Water, which is quite funny as a naming for, a capsule collection. But essentially, this collection has a lot of dress forms. It is inspired by, it has a lot of like Western African historical inspirations, which I find really cool. For people that don't actually know, so in Nigeria, what we call Mami Water is actually a mermaid. So when I was in my village, when I used to live in a village in Nigeria, there would be all these folklore tales about certain rivers that do not go to that river at night because loads of people have died there, because mermaids live there, and they will sing to you and lure you in and then drown you, basically, or like transform you into a mermaid and you'll be in the sea forever. Those were the kind of folklore tales that we used to hear. Did I believe it? Not necessarily, but did I go to the rivers to find out if they were there? Also not. But so it's a very common phrase that we use in Nigeria, and that served as, the inspiration for that piece, which I found really interesting. That inspiration was also used on many different aspects of the garment. So for example, when you look at this capsule collection, she has transform different accessories using these, like wave and ocean like waveform. So in Nigeria, we have this thing that we call like a gele. It's like a head tie. This is what Nigerian women wear. This is part of our traditional dress. So she's taken more like Western fabrics and more things like wools and cottons and transformed those using the same fabric that she used for that capsule collection into like Nigerian and West African shapes. So now when you go back to looking at the capsule collection, you can see some of the head forms that she's created. That's kind of what it's referencing, which is really cool because it's like a really cool way to use those garments and to use those fabrics to create interesting accessories that's really cool to wear, but also referencing a very traditional way of dressing in West Africa, right? So I thought this was really cool. I really enjoyed the way that she transformed things using this sort of Mami Water idea, which I thought was really funny when I saw the name of it. But you can see the different ways that she's used this. This is also another element that she's done. So one of the themes of her work that I find more interesting than a lot of others, to be honest, is she takes elements of beauty. And I think this was a big focus in her Spring Summer 24 collection, if I'm not mistaken, which we can talk about. But she uses elements of beauty and tries to find elements of beauty and transform them to kind of change our viewpoint and our vantage point when we look at it. So she's taken like hair, elements of hair and locks, and kind of turned that into like a head accessory in a way, which is really cool. So it's like a locks hat in a way. It's like she's called it a crown. She specifically called it like a crown, which is so cool. I find that so interesting how she's created that. And she even made, I think in this collection, she made a beret using that fabric. I can't seem to find it, but I remember at the time there was, okay, yeah, here it is. So she also had a beret in the same style, which I thought was also really cool. So even though this was a capsule collection, I liked the referencing, I liked the research, and I liked how she's transformed that into garments. Yeah, she's Brazilian and Nigerian, so that's where the West African elements are coming from in her work. For guys that don't know, she's Nigerian Brazilian. Someone said they have tales like that in South Carolina. What about the mermaids that will eat you up in the sea? Yeah, those are some of the tales that I grew up around when I was younger, to be fair. Yeah, it's really, really insane actually when you think about it. It's quite ridiculous. But that's just kind of what people believe. It's not really much you can do about it, to be fair. But going through her Instagram, because I wanted to talk about her Spring Summer 24 collection, because talking about elements of beauty and kind of how she transforms that, as you can see here, this is kind of what she's done with a lot of the crown pieces in her Spring Summer 24 collection. But what she did here, she used, and you can see her research, she's looked at a lot of like Nigerian traditional dress and has woven that in with elements of beauty that she superimposed onto the garment. So yes, it is inspired by different folk tales and Nigerian inspiration. I'm just trying to see if we can get the runway images from that collection, because I think that would be really cool to look at. I guess we could just look at it this way. So she's taken like misdirections of different beauty things like hair, makeup, and just transformed our use of that, putting them on the arms in a weird way, taking this sort of lock thing and turning those into tops or skirts and using that as details in the skirts, or using that as a detail for the armholes for the garments, which is really cool. So that was something that really interested me, an element that really interested me when it came to this collection. As you can see, one of the hero pieces in this collection was actually this shoulder detail. Let me zoom in so you guys can see it. This shoulder detail, this kind of indented shoulder detail, I really love, and it's something that she used across like the vest, the dresses, the jackets, had that detail on the shoulders. So I absolutely love that. Someone is saying, honestly, it's very CDG, beautiful cultural references, but I'm not excited by it. I've seen this probably at London Fashion Week. I mean, with designers, it takes a lot of time to like find the, like aesthetically, to find the aesthetic in that sense. But I like where her thought process is going, especially the references. I really, really do enjoy the references that she uses. So that's why I'm always interested to look at her work. Something that really interested me, because it was really referencing some West African silhouettes, was the use of fabrics. because this is why I said that a lot of her work kind of finds that middle ground between fabrics that we are used to or accustomed to in the West, but then also, fabrics, silhouettes and stuff and references in West Africa. Because in West Africa, what she's done, I'll show you a reference to what she's done with this skirt, right? So in Nigeria specifically, and in West Africa, this is like a common thing. We have this thing that we call a wrapper. We call it a wrapper, but a wrapper, you guys can call it a wrapper. And it's usually made in fabrics, different fabrics in Nigeria. We use like different mixes of cotton, silk, and rayon to make different things like ashoke, which you guys would have seen. So this is kind of what ashoke is. As it says, ashoke is a traditional hand-woven fabric from Nigeria, primarily associated with the Yoruba people of the southwestern part of Nigeria. This is what it looks like. So this fabric here is what we refer to, just kind of like a piece of fabric like this is what we refer to as a wrapper in Nigeria. And what we do is we take this fabric and tie it around our bodies in different ways. So I don't know why these images are like blurry. So some ways, sometimes you just put it over your shoulder like that, like how you can see the woman doing it here. She has that fabric over her shoulder. And then you have some men put it over their shoulders as well. Some women tie it around their waist into a skirt. So there's many here. You can see again how she's used part of the fabric to make a head tie, and then part of it she's put over her shoulder. Sometimes women use it for skirts. So she's kind of taken fabrics and draped it in a very similar way, I noticed, with a lot of like the skirts and the pieces in the collection. So that was something when I saw the collection, I was like, oh, that's a really interesting reference. I like how she's done that. Like even here, when you look at the skirt, you can see there's kind of like that wraparound element to the skirts, right? That I was like, oh, that's really interesting how she's done that. Let me just adjust my hat. So I thought that was really cool. Yeah, like people are saying like an Indian sari, exactly. And that was one of the things that she was trying to achieve through this collection. Like even here, you can kind of see across the collection, there's kind of like that vibe of like a wraparound sort of detail to the way that the skirts were designed. Here, of course, you can see the shoulder detail that I was talking about more closely. What I love about this, because a lot of designers, I think it's very important to have very obvious signatures in your work. I think this is something that could become one of her strong signatures. I think she makes really strong accessories, like I've said, those sort of mismatched accessories that she makes, whether it's the crowns, the headwear, referencing West African themes. I showed you guys like the really weirdly shaped pearl earrings that I think are really fun. So that sort of indented shoulder detail is really cool. I like to see how she uses that. I think it could really work on really commercial pieces like a t-shirt, right? If you have a t-shirt with a big indented shoulder, kind of like what you guys are saying is kind of, the comme des garçons thing, right? That would be really cool just to wear as a t-shirt in the summer when the weather is hot, but also not have a basic looking outfit. That is really cool. So she can implement that in many different ways, in ways that can make money. Obviously, this was her runway debut in Paris, and it was a big deal that Naomi Campbell walked on the show, but you can see here she's wearing this piece that's layered with a shirt and then a coat that also has that indented shoulder detail that I think could definitely be a winner for the brand. So here, once again, you can see a lot of references and a lot of the influences that she's used when it comes to her garments. So yeah, those are my quick thoughts on her work. Really, really a fan. I think she's still ironing out, like in terms of her distinctive design language, but I think she's working towards it. And I think there are definitely many elements to her work that I find really interesting. Here you can see some more of the West African influences. Here you can see, once again, what I was talking about with the wraparound aesthetic that you tend to see in West Africa. I like what she's doing with the headwear. I like the accessories, kind of what she's doing. So I think there's a lot to work with. And that's kind of the thing about the LVMH prize, especially if you win one of the awards that are part of the LVMH prize, they offer mentorship. And when they give you the mentorship, that's where these people can then help you really refine your thought process into, garments that sell, into a more commercial sense. That's when they can start doing those things. So I think when she gets more mentorship from those people, I think we're going to see, those pieces be refined. But one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of hers is a lot of her inspiration points don't come from the tired, worn out inspiration points I'm so tired of seeing in fashion. It's coming from West Africa. She's referencing different tribes in West Africa, different gestures in the dressing from different cultures around the world. So that's something that I find really fascinating about her work, which is why I'm always interested in it. I think too many brands always reference the same historical periods of art and the same, Western references that we've seen over and over again. I don't think there's anything wrong with a Western reference. I think that Western culture and history is very vast and rich. I just don't understand why people reference the same thing in Western culture when Western culture is so deep. Art history in the West is so deep. There's so many elements to it. There's so many iconic artists. I find it strange that people end up referencing the same things. So that's what fascinates me about her work the most, that, her inspiration points, aren't coming from those tired and washed out places. So there's more to see, and I think there's many more to come from her work and from her practice. So I'll be looking forward very much to seeing what else she does. Are you talking about Louise Bourgeois? Louise Bourgeois is one of them. I know that Simone Rocha likes a Louise Bourgeois reference, but it is a bit of a tired reference, if I'm going to be very honest with you. It is quite tired. But yeah, as you guys can see, I've just been scrolling through her Instagram, so you can see a lot of her references to hair and West African culture and history and clothing. But yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on her work. And in future streams, we will be looking at other of the LVMH Prize finalists. We'll be looking at their work one by one. So that should be, really, really fun. This YouTube channel runs on your support. If you want to support the channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon. You'll gain access to exclusive content that includes everything from my Patreon podcast, where I give a behind-the-scenes insight into the fashion industry, as well as a fashion book club, where I review my favorite fashion books. You can also check out my fashion ebook, which highlights the best fashion journalists to follow, definitions of common fashion terminology, and how to determine what a good source of fashion information is. The links to everything are in the description below.